Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us for this week's devotional. We have been talking this month about growing in the skill of Christian discernment. And this is something that is becoming increasingly important as we live in the world of fake news and where it's just becoming harder and harder to know who is telling the truth. And so we've talked this month about a number of different things. We began by talking about some questions that we can use to help us discern. The 4 questions that we talked about were what's being said, what is made to be appealing or unattractive, where do we agree or disagree and why, and what difference does this make? 2 weeks ago, we talked about our gut reactions and the need to examine those and what that looks like. And then last week, we talked about this, how more and more something can be obvious to one person in our world and not at all to another. And how do we understand that experience and just some guidance for when that happens. To wrap up this month, I want to talk about a very human tendency that we all have to look for and believe something that confirms what we already think, that agrees with what we already think about something, and to downplay or ignore that which doesn't. You may have heard this referred to as confirmation bias. And we see an example of this in the Bible, in the book of 1 Kings chapter 12. Solomon has been the king of Israel. He has reigned for a long time. He's been very prosperous as king, but he is now dead. And his son, Rehoboam, is ascending to the throne. And in 1 Kings 12, verses 1 through 5, it says, Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had gone there to make him king. When Jeroboam, son of Nebat, heard this, he was still in Egypt, where he had fled from King Solomon. He returned from Egypt. So they sent for Jeroboam, and he and the whole assembly of Israel went to Rehoboam and said to him, Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you. Rehoboam answered, Go away for 3 days and then come back to me. So the people went away. We find out that for the many good things that Solomon did as king, that he had also been a harsh king in some ways, enforcing many people to labor for him and to live under a very heavy yoke. And the people come to Rehoboam and they say, We will pledge loyalty to you if you will lighten the load. And he says, Okay, I need some time to consider this. Now, this is all good. He didn't just respond with his gut reaction. He is looking at what they have said and he's seeking advice. In 1 Kings 12, 6 through 8, we read this. Then King Rehoboam consulted the elders who had served his father Solomon during his lifetime. How would you advise me to answer these people, he asked. They replied, If today you will be a servant to these people and serve them and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants. He goes to the elders, these men who had served his father well, who've shown wisdom in life, and they give him good advice. But this is not what Rehoboam wanted to hear. He rejects their advice because they didn't agree with what he was thinking. Instead, he goes to the young men that he grew up with, and this is what they tell him. The young men who had grown up with him replied, These people have said to you, Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but make our yoke lighter. Now tell them, My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. My father laid on you a heavy yoke. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions. These young men, they stroke Rehoboam's ego. They confirm what he has been thinking. They say to him, they think your dad is tough. You show them tough and you tell them you ain't seen nothing yet. It's going to get a whole lot worse. And Rehoboam does what they say. And do you know what the result was? The 10 northern tribes of Israel rejected him as king. A civil war begins and the nation of Israel is split into 2. If we are to grow in the skill of Christian discernment, we need to be honest about what we already think. We need to have the humility that admits, you know what, we could be wrong, or we may need to sharpen our thinking and understanding. We need to have the willingness to reflect and to examine the facts and the data and the information, even if it disagrees with what we currently think. Just an awareness of this can be so helpful for us. There is no foolproof way to keep us from falling into confirmation bias. But if we will seek to grow in the skill of discernment, if this will help us to find more and more the good and the true and the beautiful. And when we do this, it will also help us to live in faithfulness to Jesus. Thanks so much for watching again this week. I hope the rest of your week is great, and I will see you again on Sunday for worship.